Hey everyone, thank you for um, coming to my pattern making workshop. What I'm going to do is go through how I put patterns on round pots. This process is designed specifically for people who are not very illiterate in math or very literate in math. So it's a simple process. It requires a few specialized tools. It is time consumptive, but it's an easy way to make a pattern that will expand and contract with a round pot. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is cut a template. For that, you need some paper and a 360-degree protractor. So here is the paper. Here's my protractor. You put the protractor down and you simply outline your circle. And then you want to mark whatever designation you want. Now this does involve math, but it's not a ton of math. So I'm going to put a marker at every 20 degrees. And that's going to give me 18 sections. So you just go around like that, mark each division, and then you want to go in and cut it with either scissors or a scalpel or X-Acto knife. I'm using pretty thick Bristol paper. It tends to be easier to work with because you want to really keep the paper level. Now, if you're working on a smaller pot, like this one here, what you're going to want to do is after you lay down the outline and segment your circle, you're going to want to put divisions on it and then cut it with a protractor. Cut it with a compass. So basically what you would do is you would just go in like this and just mark up the divisions and then get a protractor and use that to make the middle. Now, you guys don't need to watch me use a compass or a protractor, so I've already done that part, and I'm going to go to the next part of the process. This is the first pot I'm going to start a pattern on. Okay, now I've already cut the template. If you're really good at eyeing things, you don't need to do this step, but I tend to do this step just because it makes me feel a little better. I don't like to just put the template down like that, and you can see how the template's divided. It's not the cleanest cut in the world, but that really doesn't matter too much. And you can also see with the Bristol, it holds its form a lot better. If this was just a sheet of a notebook paper or typing paper, it wouldn't hold as well. But anyway, what I do is, you can do this on a wheel or a banding wheel. Just put down a quick pencil line, and that's just to give you a rough area so you know that it's going to be fairly center. Then what you want to do is take your template, place it on top of the piece, and you want to, you're using the pencil lines that you laid down as a guide to show you where you put to where it would be center. Now, I do my markings with waterproof markers. These are fancy schmancy markers. I have them because I do illustration work. The cheapo children marker 12-pack is just as good. Prefer waterproof markers because, watercolor markers because they are watercolor. If you use a permanent marker or an ink marker that has any kind of carbon in it, that kind of acts like a resist. But with these, you can put glaze over them and you won't know that the mark was there. Plus, they burn off easily. The inks are cheap, so there's no metallic elements in them that's going to stick. They should burn off at Kono 18. So anyway, you have your marker down, and now you want to set out your first row. Now, when I do this, I like to go basically from lighter to darker. You'll see later there are additional steps in setting up a design, and just for obvious reasons, it makes more sense that you want your final pattern to be done with a darker marker than a lighter marker. But anyway, so I have this down, and there, it's pretty well centered. So all I do is I put a little mark right along where the template is. Okay, so I've done that. I put my marks down. This is basically my first row, and it's my base row for my pot. I'll take this off, and you can see the exciting set of, not sure if you can see them, there are dots on there. Okay, there you can see where the dots are. Because I use the protractor, they're fairly even around the pot. Now the next step is to start making your set of rows. And for this, I put a link in the event comments in the post where you can go on to Amazon if you're in the United States, or the equivalent if you're in another country, to get basically a plastic architect's template. These were used at one time to primarily draw to scale. Now everybody uses a computer. But what they do is they give you a perfect circle that's graduated from the smallest one is 1/16 of an inch all the way up to 1 3/8 of an inch. Now, what you do with this pretty simply is if you look at the template, okay, you can see it's marked on 4 corners. On the 0, the 90, the 180, and the 270 list or division. What you want to do is line up on 0 or 180 the 2 of the dots. Okay, so On this piece, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up, it looks like this circle here is about the size of the divisions I have. So I put this down, and what I'm doing is I'm lining up the mark here with this line and the mark here with that line. And then you go in with your pen, excuse me for a sec, and you want to put a mark at here and here. And you go around the pot marking each segment that way. Now there are times where it's going to be a little bit off, but that's okay. This actually is fairly consistent, so that's cool. It's also, this is another reason why you want to do your pencil line first, because if your first row of dots is slanted, that's only going to get magnified as you go down or up the pot. So anyway, I'm going around the wheel and I'm just adding a dot. Okay, so now I went from 1 row to 3 rows. The next row you want to do, you're going to go and use the template, and the one I had just used, this one, is going to be a little bit too small. So what I do is I just go up to the next segment and I do that. And what that's doing is that's giving me another row to work on. Now, when you do this, there is going to be some variant, and you can use the lines as just a marker. You want to make sure that the top row is in line, so when you do it, you get a fairly vertical line. So I got my third row down now, and I don't want to spend the next 45 minutes showing you how to put dots on pots. Everything from here goes the same. The next thing I want to do is show you how, now when you do this, you can see you're going to get a diamond grid. I think you can see that. So it's not a checkerboard, it's going to be a diamond. What you want to do then, if you want to do a checkerboard shape, which is kind of necessary for anything that involves a tumbling block design, which I'll be showing you in a few minutes, you need to change that and align it vertically, and that you can do fairly easily. It's a little bit too faint to see. I'll use a blue to do the line so you can see it a little better. But this pot, I already have done all the dots on it. And as you can see, the dots expand and contract with the profile of the piece. Okay, and that's the whole purpose of this. So you don't have to measure, you just get the grid. Now, the vertical lines are pretty easy to do. And the good thing about these, they're great for doing drawings on a round surface because they're rigid to give you a straight line, but they're flexible enough to be able to, as you can see, just fit to the side of the pot. So anyway, you take, to do a vertical, you just line up one of the rows and you just go like that. Then you do the next row. And that, see where to go to. That is fairly easy to do. That goes really quickly. And the next thing you would want to do is take the protractor or the template and just connect the lines horizontally. Now, and you can see how I'm doing it here. Okay, there's the line. And you would continue it around the entire pot. And let me just do one line for you real quick. On sections like this where it's not a vertical wall, you generally have to do it in sections just because you really can't get the template tool to flex properly. And also, I just feel more comfortable with a more linear grid. And if you were to do it round, it would be more of a rounded grid. And let me do just a few more lines here so you can get the whole effect. And I'll do a few here. Now, one of the things, there are some advantages and disadvantages to this process. The disadvantage is it is really time consumptive, which for a lot of you, like me, actually is a bit of an advantage because, it's either this or binging Netflix. So at least this is slightly productive. And you can see here, when I'm done, how I have a checkerboard grid. And this square here is much smaller than that square there. And they just gradually expand and contract very, very simply. Now, Annette Greer said you make something complex seem easy. Well, actually, it is easy. I remember I was going to a Tom Coleman workshop, and I don't want to single out Tom Coleman, but he was doing a throwing demo, and he took a porcelain cylinder, he threw it, he cut it off, he set it aside, then he threw a porcelain vase, and he took the cylinder without heating it or anything, plopped it on the base and threw it together. And I elbowed my friend and I said, "Do you know what I learned from that demo?" And she said, "No, what?" And I said, "I learned that Tom Coleman can throw a lot better than I can." But the thing for Ms. Greer is this is easy. Every workshop I've done on this, and I've done 4 or 5, the students pick it up and they're able to do the designs. I don't need to do anything. If you can draw a straight line and you can use a calculator, you can do this. It's the only there are a few downsides. One, it is tremendously time consumptive. 2, a lot of glazes are far better poured than painted, which becomes a problem because then you have to use masks, and that's really difficult. But other than that, the process itself you can do. You can go mail order these, throw a pot biscuit, and on Monday, boom, you can do this. Okay, now I want to show you how I go from those pots or that grid to what's called a tumbling block pattern. Tumbling block patterns are probably the most ubiquitous pattern there you can use or see. It's basically used in everything from Islamic mosaics to shaker quilts to the video game Cubert. It's basically a pattern which gives an illusion of a three-dimensional effect. On this pot, I've already gridded out everything. There you can see it. Now, when you start your laying out your pattern, and I'm going to show you a few different variations of tumbling blocks. When you start laying out your patterns, what you're going to want to do is pick a starting point and then go 2 rows over and 1 row down. Then 2 rows over, 1 row up, and continue that throughout the pot. Okay, now, again, you take your handy dandy tool and you start connecting those. Now, once you set up the first row, you really don't need to do any of the other rows. You don't need to put dots on the other rows. You can just do parallel lines. It'll be fairly obvious after you set up your first set of dots. So you go around the pot and you just do diagonal lines like this. Now in a true tumbling block, they would be set up, I think, at 66 degrees or something like that, which, this really doesn't exactly mimic, but that's okay. So this is your first set of diagonals. Can you see it there? Okay, that's going to set up your grid. Next, you're going to do a second set of diagonals. And that's going to give you basically the outline you need to do a tumbling block pattern. So you can see oops. Where is it? Okay, you can see right there that you're getting like a diamond grid. Now what you're going to want to do is start to connect the pattern, the pieces to create a tumbling block. This here oops, screwed up. That there is the basic foundation for any tumbling block design. Now, you can do a few more complex things where you're going to want to have some a little bit more three-dimensional effects. Now, one of the things that is really important to consider with making pattern is a lot of times the simplest pattern is more effective than a complex pattern because the analogy I like to use is the Star Wars movies. If any of you remember the original trilogy, one of the things that made them better, in my opinion, was Lucas was actually kind of restrained by not having the special effects technology he needed to do vast battle scenes. And if you look at the later movies, there are a lot of scenes where it's almost impossible to follow the action sequences because there's just too much going on. And as you do patterns, you can get caught up in doing things that are way too complex and that the viewer just isn't going to get. Now, give me just a minute. Finish up a second area of grid. One of the processes that I did this a lot on was Raku. And there are two reasons why I like doing Raku. One, aesthetically, I really like the idea of the sort of rigidity of the pattern and the geometric nature of the pattern being juxtaposed to the sort of the randomness of the atmospheric firing, so that when you started firing, you wouldn't know the effects you would have. And if you were using a copper trapping or a copper flashing glaze, you'd get random effects that would be good. Now, the next thing I'm gonna want to do is a kind of Y-shaped pattern with interlocking Ys. Once I see it, you'll recognize it. Again, here is the outline of the pattern. And now for this, I'm going to go down one, go over one, down one again, over one, and then for the other side, I'm going to go down, over two, down one, and then over two. And what that gives me is like a kind of L shape. Let me see. You can see that. Then for the next part, again, it's the same process, down one, over one, down one, over one. And that gives you the second part of the shape. And I'm going to do the third here. So there you have what's basically a triangular shape or a Y shape. What's really nice about this is, as opposed to tumbling blocks, this gives you a much more three-dimensional quality in the final piece. Now, if you want these interlocking, you want to set the next one in that row so that this notch here fits into the bottom here. And then again, you're going down one over one, down one over one, and it's mirrored by two consecutive rows. So you can see how those two pieces, those two patterns are kind of interlocked. And then when you start the next row, you want to start it so this part here goes here, goes in here. So you go over like that, and you go down like this. And that's going to give you a interlocking pattern. And what's really cool about that is if you do it over the entire piece, it really almost gives it like an Escher-like quality. Now, one of the things that you might want to do as you go along, because I may have done millions of tumbling blocks in my life. I've been doing, before I put them on pots, I was doing these as doodles. I do them on planes and stuff like that. I still will get screw up and miss a line or something. So one of the things you may want to do is, and again, waterproof watercolor markers, just put the color in that you're going to want to glaze it, and so you don't, so you're able to keep these in line, so you know what you want to do, and you know, once you get the hang of it, you probably won't screw up much, but you probably will once or twice need to wipe off glaze, but that's no big deal. It's, you know, stuff happens. If you miss one, don't worry about it. Now, quickly, what I'd like to do is show you another one of the popular patterns that people really seem to like, and I don't have a good name for it. So for me, I'm just going to refer to this as my Birkenstock pattern. And with this is you take your handy dandy template tool and you just align it up so that you're doing quarter segments a piece, and I'll show you it in just a second. Let me get about 4 down. And all I'm doing is let me lining up this marker just like when I laid out the pattern, and I'm putting a line there. I'm just filling in the circle there. Here it's going to be slightly bigger, so I go to a slightly larger one. I put in the circle there. Then I go and I do it the other way. Oops. And there you go. You have a, see if you can see that. You have a pattern that looks like the bottom of Birkenstock shoes. Now, in the sometimes I'm not as smart as I think I am section, I'll tell you this while I'm going through. And when I first started doing this, probably was doing this intensely. I started about 2004, and I had always done raku, painted raku, where I would use underglazes and paint over them or paint on them, and with clear glaze, and that would be my and then fire it in the raku kiln. So and I had been doing this for about 2 years, and it was really good because I'd get it was a way that I could get nice reds and also have the flashing effect. So again, I like contradiction in pieces, so that worked out well. But one day I'm at the store, I'm just puttering around looking, I think it was Trinity Ceramics in Dallas. I'm looking to pick out what glaze I want to work with or see if they have any raku glazes. And then I'm in the aisle and I see, oh, they have a Cone 6 Christmas red. And I thought to myself, wait a second, all of these years, instead of putting down like 3 coats of underglazes and then painting a clear on top, and if you've ever worked with underglazes, they can be difficult to put glaze over because they kind of act like a resist. I could have been just using a Cone 6 red, and part of that's just, a built-in blind spot, that I think a lot of academically trained ceramics have towards lower temperature glazes, but I went and I used the commercial glazes and it cut down my time about half and looked great. So let me show you what this looks like. I have 3 rows of them. You can see that there. Okay. Now, and with these, you basically, it's also fairly easy to know how to do an alternate glazing because whatever row they're on is going to be determine what color you want. Now you can go to more complex color breakups, but that, I wouldn't recommend. Just straight is fine. Now, finally, what I'd like to do is walk you through one of the new sort of patterns that I like to do. Now, one of the things, before I get to that, one of the things that you have to consider before you start segmenting your work is you need to remember, or you need to calculate out, if you're going to do a more complex pattern, you're going to need to calculate out what divisions of rows you need. Now, this is fairly easy because it repeats itself after 2 rows. So you can do 18, 16, 10, 20, 4, 6, 8 divisions of a pot, and you can do tumbling blocks on them, and it won't really matter, just as long as divided by 2. This, however, each one of these pieces, elements, needs 4 rows to repeat itself. So whatever you do needs to be divisible by 4. Now, that's not too terribly difficult with a 360-degree protractor. You can do 4 would be 90 degrees each, 8 would be 45 degrees each, 12 would be 30 degrees each, 16 would be, I think that's 15 apiece. But you need to make sure that what the number of rows you put is divisible by 4, because the last thing you want to do is spend 2 hours drawing dots on pots and doing lines, and then you come and this and this don't align, so you have to start all over. So just consider that when you start out. But the last design I'd like to show you is kind of a variation off of tumbling blocks. It's not as three-dimensional as tumbling blocks, but I just like it because I think it's a little simpler, and I like the way it breaks up the piece, and it gives you a large surface. Again, if you're using atmospheric glazes or flashing glazes, it works really well. And give me just a minute to get all of this set up. Okay, I think that's enough. Now, you start out by just doing one tumbling block. Now, you can see here, now you can either segment this in so it's a tumbling block, or you just leave it. I'm going to just leave it for now because I think that'll make it simpler. Then you put beneath it basically the same block. And then next to it, you put a block. I remember one day in my studio, I was in a community studio, and it was right before lunch. I was doing these as carvings, so I had my piece and I was carving it, and there was a wonderful woman next to me. I forgot her name, unfortunately, who uh, was always very supportive of me. And she's watching me do this, and she says to me, "Some people have the patience of Job." Well, the woman herself was doing burnished stoneware. She didn't use terracig. She just took stoneware and she burnished it. And I look at her and I think to myself, I didn't say anything because she's a very nice woman. I don't want to offend her, but I think to myself, you just rubbed a pot with a rock for 2 days. Don't tell me about patience. And the reason why I bring that up is this may not be for you. It can't, you may think of this as extraordinarily tedious. And even if you do like the results, you just can't imagine yourself ever spending this much time glazing a pot, and that's fine. But I mean, every ceramic process has some sort of tedium in it, and there's, you know, different tediums for respond to different people, and so you find out what you enjoy, what kind of repetitive thing do you not that are you okay doing or enjoy doing for the most part. I mean, I I had a recent workshop in India, and the demonstrator was talking, and he made the same point of do whatever you want. And then afterwards, he was talking, and he uses a fork to score, and he said he doesn't understand why anyone on earth would ever use a needle tool to score. It just doesn't make any sense to him. And I'm like, I use a needle tool because I like scoring with a needle tool. I know it's insanely time consumptive and it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, but that's fine. I mean, I'm okay with it. It's my time. And if you figure out things that you do, and I remember at an NCCA conference, the presenter was talking about Turkish potters and that for them, every drop of glaze was a prayer and that there was a spiritual element in making a pot. And, I kind of smirked and had a snarky reaction to it because, I just didn't think that made any sense at all. But as I've continued to work, I think I've come to the conclusion that a good deal of ceramics is this intense concentration that isn't prayer. I wouldn't put it that high, but I would say it's almost meditative. And that part of the appeal of art is that there are particular viewers, not everyone, and not for everyone. People are going to respond to, there are people who will respond to my work, but there will look at my friend's work and it won't do anything for them. But what they're responding to is at the time I'm making the work, I'm in a state of meditation. They're not in, but they feel that kind of meditative quality. And here is the final thing. As you can see, you have these interlocking stars surrounded by 6 squares. And that I really like just because it really is good for showing how the pot's expanding and contracting without the pot. Okay, so that is about an hour. Let me move this aside. And thank you all for coming. If you have any more questions, you can send me a message via email or messenger. I'll be happy to address them. And if you have any questions right now, feel free to text, ask them in the group. I can take questions for 5 to 10 minutes if you want. Okay, there doesn't seem to be any questions. Like I said, I can answer anything you have to ask in Messenger. And I appreciate you giving me an hour of your time. I hope you find it informative. If you don't live in the United States, I'm sure you have an equivalent of Amazon in where you live, and the tools are fairly simple and the process is fairly simple. Once again, thank you very much, and I enjoyed giving this presentation. Have a good day.